Uh, Anybody who's worked with ES4 has probably come across the smart views. There's a few pre-baked ones that you've seen, but there still is, I think, a bit of an art to building one of these things, especially when you get your first look at the interface to build them, and it can look a bit opaque and intimidating at first. So basically, we're going to go over what are they, why would you want to use them, and how do you make them. As you probably know, the smart views are a way to build a custom interface for specific users who may have very limited or particular tasks. And we build that interface by typically, when you start building one of these smart views, presenting a big bucket of information and then filtering it down to present all the information that that user needs based on milestones, approval cycles, metadata, all that kind of stuff. One of the advantages to the smart views over the typical approach to working in ES that you're usually used to is that normally a user accesses a customer in a project and he works within that project with the files in it. The smart views allow a single user to see files across multiple projects and even multiple customers if they have access to them, all in one single view. So it's one way to gather up everything that they need to work on in a single interface. And the last point I make here again is if they have a kind of limited scope of activities in ES, you can make this very focused GUI for them. Now, what I'm going to go over today, and I think this is a bit the opposite of what we often have seen with smart views in the past, is if you've seen presentations from DALiM during webinars or at users group, you'll see them displaying and looking at files in a smart view, but they don't ever really tell you how they made that thing or how that came to be. So I'm going to probably spend most of my time today, in fact I should, and actually putting one together and kind of going over the nuts and bolts of it. Now, the approach I'm going to take is what I call the three-step approach to smart views. This is the way I've kind of tackled it to be able to kind of wrap my own mind around it. So I'm going to basically go through three steps. The first thing we'll do is we're going to define the column or list views and the gallery views. What this initially does then, it gives you some framework for how the files will be displayed in terms of the information it gives you, buttons and so forth. And what you'll see, especially when you start working with the column and gallery views, they almost look like you're doing the same thing because you'll use a lot of the same metadata information, project name, file name, all that kind of stuff. But you'll see that they give you radically different views. Step two is to then start adding actions to the smart view so you can actually do something with the files. Because you'll see after the first step that we do here, you really can't do much of anything except look at a bunch of stuff. So the actions allow the users to start being able to do the kind of things they usually do in ES, approve, reject, annotate, that kind of thing. And the third step is probably the most important, I think, is when you start configuring filters and user filters so the customers or the users don't get basically a huge bucket of unmanageable files. You want to filter things out so they see what they need to see instead of a bunch of extraneous files that can make, frankly, if the filters were not in use, the smart views would probably be an almost unmanageable feature to use. So let's get started. The other thing you'll probably see me do today is I'm going to work in two browsers. And the reason I'm going to do that is that going constantly back and forth from configuring and then back to the smart view in a single browser is not only annoying, but it can be time consuming. So what do we know about ES? You can see both of my browsers have timed out, so let me get them both back in again. I'm going to use Safari to make the stuff and Chrome to view it. So we know that you configure Smart Views under the customization area and the Smart Views window. Let's get this guy up here. All right. Now, what I'm going to start with is a blank Smart View, and we're going to go over how to build it. So you can see here I have a Smart View called Webinar Smart View Blank. You see there's nothing in them. So if in my browser on the right I tell it to use that, you can see I definitely have a view, but there's nothing smart about it. There's absolutely nothing there. It's empty. So I'm going to go through what I said we should do for the first step, which is define the gallery layout and the column layout. And the thing to remember about those is those are really not foreign concepts if you've worked in ES. That's a gallery view. That's a column or list view in a normal project. So what we're going to do is build a custom view with that paradigm, we'll say, in mind. So once we get into these different tabs in here, we want to start dragging in the different features we want to use, because typically we always want to have a preview. So let's say I do only that for the gallery view, and I save it. If I go back to my Chrome browser on the right and tell it to show me that Smart View, all of a sudden I got some stuff. I got some previews in here. So you can see already that a single setting like that now presents something within the Smart View interface for us, although I think we'd all agree that this is not of much utility other than clicking on a file and looking at it. So we now want to start adding the other information that we may want to see in here. And one of the key things that you probably already noticed is this browser on the right-hand side of the window that has all of the different attributes and metadata and these little widget things that can be used to build these things up. And what I'm going to use is a lot of the fairly standard ones, but you can see that you have quite a canvas to choose from. So we'll say that within our gallery view, we want to be able to see the file name. Let's say we want to know the customer name, the name of the project, and I'm not sure how quickly my screen is updating, but I'm just dragging and dropping those to these fields here. And let's say we just want, what's that, Fred?
So it's doing fine. It's keeping up pretty good.
And let's say the last thing we want is maybe if files are instead of a folder, they want to see them. So again, I'm just going to save those changes. And now, again, if I go to my other browser and tell it to show me the Smart View, you'll now see that I'm starting to build up some information on these files. Some of these that you see in here are from, I think, a file system view, so they're kind of lacking in things like project and customer. But you'll see here, file name of the customer is Acme, and the name of the project is Velasquez Basic. This was evidently a test job I was working with on the guys for Velasquez, but you can see that's the same for all files. So we're starting to get somewhere with this. One thing you'll see when you build the gallery view is this column here where it says gallery, and it gives you an option, gallery or tooltip. What the tooltip option should do is instead of displaying that information as you see within the little containing object for the file, is instead, if you hover over it, it'll pop up the information that's set for tooltip. But I think in general, most people prefer to just have the information just pop up for them so they can see it. Next, we're going to build the list view or the column view, because if you, again, look at Chrome right now, the column view shows us absolutely nothing because there's nothing defined for it. And what we're going to do in the column view really isn't much different than what we did in the gallery view. We want all of these files. Let's kind of clear some of this out. I want them to show me the customer name. Let's see, project name. One thing that you should keep in mind is whenever you're working in this column here, if you're really not sure where a file, one of these options might be, you can just type in the search button up at the top, and of course it's there we go, because I'm looking for something called current step. So if you type it in, it will narrow down the search, and you can fairly quickly get to these if you still aren't familiar with where to find all those guys. And let's see, I want to get this thing called the document status. And I always want to have a preview. And the last one I'll put in here is something that's referred to as the Milestone Bar. Now you'll see in certain options that you drag in here, they'll sometimes pop up this little button that says Edit Properties. So you can see some of these beneath the surface have a whole lot of extra configurating you can do. We're not going to get into that guy for now, but you should keep that in mind, that some of those are highly configurable, and that's what makes this stuff, you know, a bit daunting sometimes. If we go back to Chrome now, reload our Smart View. Let's look at the list view, and now we got some files in the list view. Now, one of the issues you see right now is that I'm logged in as the administrator. And because I'm the administrator, I'm seeing everything on this my ES system. That's why I mentioned earlier the notion of needing to filter out what you're working on with the Smart Views. Now, one simple way to deal with filtering is the same way you would deal with limiting your views in a normal ES. I'm going to log in as a user who is associated with only 2 different customers. So by default, in terms of the way ES works, he will only be able to see in his Smart View the files associated with his customers. So you can see now I've at least started to get a slightly more manageable list of files to view. This is that Milestone Bar thing I was mentioning earlier. And before we move away from, you know, defining your columns and your gallery, another thing that's kind of common to Smart Views versus normal ES viewing is within the list view, you still have the ability to go in and turn on or turn off different columns. But as in contrast to how it's done in a normal project, the only columns that you see in the list are the ones that have already been defined in the Smart View. So we still have control over which columns we may or may not want to see. There's one item that I should have already turned on. It's kind of a default one you'll usually want to use. It's this Frame tab. The Frame tab really doesn't give you the ability to drag and drop any new items in it, but it does allow you to turn on a little sidebar that most of us are used to seeing when we work in ES. So what I just did is if we go to a little tab here, you can see now that my approval option, my metadata guy, and my milestone status option are now all in play. Now you're probably going to see here, I usually prefer kind of working in the gallery view. So you can see all that usual stuff that we're used to seeing is now presented. So now we have to start saying, all right, let's say that we're kind of satisfied with the way our files are displaying and the things we're seeing on them. I think I've got a few here on my file system that are not accessible because I dropped them out. That's why you see some of these blanks. So let's start putting in different options so people can do things. This is the actions area. Now let's just go with a couple of the most basics. People usually want to have the ability to approve files. They maybe want to reject them. Let's say they want to be able to delete. And maybe they want to delete them as well. Let's save it. As soon as we update our Smart View, notice at the top right now that I have some of the, again, the standard type of options you expect to see in ES. Now by default, those will usually appear up here and nowhere else, but it's not uncommon to want to kind of gussy up the interface a bit. So if you've added some actions, let's say we hit this preview icon on all 4 of these. This is where you can start maybe getting a little too busy with the way you set up your Smart View, because once we turn that option on, what it actually does is it adds, you can see those options are added to the preview icon in our gallery view. So now I have the ability to delete a file from here if I choose, or if I wanted to, I could just select a file and do it from up there. So a lot of this, it gets down to how many options do you actually want to let your users have, because you can kind of get overboard on this stuff. The other setting that you'll see in here is that you can also now, if you choose, add pull-down menus in this view. This thing called menu position, I can put in any arbitrary name for a pull-down menu I want. I'm going to call this validate, let's say. And I'm going to put, I'm going to say my approve and reject are going to be under something called validate. And actually the one I should have put in here that I really shouldn't have forgotten is view. You really need that guy in there. So I should have myself a little pull-down menu now. Go back to the Smart View, and you'll see that we have the validate option, where I can pull down. So the fact is now, I've got this in 3 places. I could approve and reject in the top right. I could do it from the preview icon, and I could even do it by selecting a file and go to the pull down. So you have many, many options on how you can work with that stuff. I can see I'm already only 10 minutes from the end, so we'll probably move on now to working with filters, because I think this might be the most involved, but maybe the most important part of putting this stuff together. Let's do something very basic. And again, we'll stick with my little test Smart View that we're working with here. You'll notice there's 2 tabs. There's one called filters and there's one called user filters. And there's a very definite difference between the 2. First, I'm going to do something with filters, then we'll kind of explain and differentiate the 2. Let's say we had a user who, when he logs in, he wants only to see files for which he's the approver. And let's say also, we only want him to see files that are in current active jobs. By clicking that button, I'm saying it's only files that he's the approver for. Let's save that. So you can see again, I got a much more stripped down view of what this user is able to see. But here's the key thing to keep in mind. When you use a filter from here, that is it's basically a setting that you've layered on top of the Smart View and that the user does not have the ability to change now. This user with this Smart View cannot see any files anywhere for which he is not the approver. So he's kind of stuck in jail in that sense. He's not going to be able to see anything else. One point I want to make here that I kind of mentioned earlier is if you look, this user is seeing files in this project called Job 1. He's seeing files in the project called Job 2. And he's seeing files in this one called Last Job. So this kind of gets back to the point I made earlier that you can see files across multiple projects and multiple customers all in one view. Now, just to show how this thing kind of works, let's say that he decides he wants to approve this file. Let's go to one that looks different than the others, the one with the soup. Let's say he approves that. Notice that file disappeared from his list. There's another one, I think, with a plate of food. It disappears from his list. And I think the logic is pretty obvious. He approved it. Therefore, it moved on to the next step for which he's no longer the approval. So it's basically out of his list. And you can almost think of this as somebody's little job bag that they work their way through, right? Every time they approve a file, they just kicked it out of their to-do list. It's gone, and they move on and work on other ones. The other thing you'll notice that with this filter I set up, I also told it to filter only on active jobs. So let's look at this file. This file is in a project called SmartView Acme, or SV Acme. If we go to that, I must be looking at what am I looking at there? We'll do that one. Oh, okay. I threw in the wrong thing. This is not displaying the project name. Where it says SV Acme, it's actually displaying the name of the template. So I configured my SmartView wrong. Okay. Well, at least I know why. So let's go up here to this project. Let's say I take that project. This is the one with the cars in it, right? So if this project is changed, you can do it manually, or it can be done automatically through project workflows. He's no longer an active job. So if I go back into my SmartView, notice the cars are gone. And again, why did it happen? Because we have the overall filter set to show only active jobs. If that guy, so, oh my goodness, that job wasn't done, he's still active. We'll change him back. And you can see that the cars are back in play again. The more common way to approach filters, at least I think, in order to give a user more control, is let's say I do want to see only active jobs, but I want to give the user control over what he does and doesn't see. You'll notice that to get rid of a setting in here, you select it, you hit the minus button. So if I go to user filters, and in here I'm going to say on approval. And I'm also going to put in, and this is a pretty important one. Let me see if I can find it. I can never find this thing. There we go. This thing is called hierarchy. Hierarchy is a way to get a pull-down list so you can sift through projects and customers. And let's wait for that to save and update. There we go. So watch the top of the screen now when I refresh the SmartView. Notice all of a sudden I got myself some new options. So now you'll see, again, my user, Frank, sees all sorts of goodies because it's not filtering on files that only he can approve. I now have the ability to toggle that off and on. That's only the stuff he can approve. Let's say I only want to see files he can approve that are in that customer. So now I've narrowed the list down to that. Let's go to this other customer, webinar examples. Only files under that customer, but I can also sift down and show me only the files for which he's an approver that are in that customer. I mean, that are in that project. And you can see here that I told it to show everything in that project based not on what he can approve or on basically on any status. So you can see it suddenly threw up this other file in here as well. There's a lot of different things that you can filter on. One example, I'm not even sure if I have it here anymore. Oh yeah, here we go. This is the example I'm going to show is using metadata to define a filter. Now, this one is, and we'll just go in here real quick. I use the metadata option TIFF info, which is used to extract information from images, usually the kind of information that's thrown in when you have all the EXIFs set on digital images. And one of the options in here is make. And I actually pulled, let's go back here. I actually set this thing up so that make is going to look at the different camera manufacturers. So if I use that filter, notice I get a pull down up here at the top. So I could say, show me all images that were shot with Panasonic. Of course, this is going to, oh, on approval, turn him off. There we go. So this is using just metadata as a filter in a smart view, showing only images that were shot with a Canon camera. And just to confirm that it's really given me the straight information, if you look at the metadata over on the right-hand side, you'll see that this was, in fact, an Olympus shot. I don't know if I have any Canon. I suspect not. Although it's probably because I'm logged in as the wrong user. We're getting near the end, so there's one other thing I really should show, and this is how you...
Another 5 minutes if you want, Mike.
Okay. Well, this is still one we definitely should go. And this is, if you have a user, you know, let's say Fred is a user, and we built a smart view for him, we want to make sure he uses that smart view and he doesn't mess around with any others. So when you, I'll probably have to do this as my admin user here. When you set up your user profiles, and this is one that I've been messing around with, you'll notice right here on the main tab, the user profile tab, this option called default function. And so the default function that I put in here is a specific smart view that will basically get forced on them when they log in. So if I'll go ahead and log out as admin. I'll log back in, and I think that's the right profile. Notice when I log in, it takes me directly to that smart view. And the other thing you're going to do, you know, you obviously don't want them hopping around from one smart view to the other. You're going to filter those out in their profiles so that they can't see any of those things. And you'll see this one right here is a smart view that is based, or it has a user filter where the users can decide which milestones the files are at that they want to look at. So for instance, in this workflow that I'm messing around with right here, you'll see that there is, get that a little wider, there's a milestone called material received. So I said I want to see everything it received. There's one called rate it, so where people give it like star ratings. So this is showing me only files for this user that are at that milestone. The other one I think is final validation. I think I called it final OK here. So these are the files that are waiting for their final setup. And the other thing about this smart view that I'm playing with is I'm pretty sure it's got a filter set on it. I already forgot the name of it. I think it was that. Yeah. So not only is it giving the user the option to see files only at particular milestones, but it has already layered on top of it that it will only show them files at those milestones for which they are the approver. And again, just to get a notion of, you know, what that behavior would be like for them, they basically have 4 files here that are at the final step. So they'll say, yeah, that one's good. He okays it, disappears, because again, he did the deed. Okay, it goes away.
What you're showing right now kind of goes in hand with the question we just got, which is there a way to filter for only files that are in the pre-flight milestone? You know, it's stopped for a pre-flight issue.
Yeah, that is just a, I'm pretty sure it's an option in here. I'll have to, actually the way you would probably do it is with this guy. Oh, that's not him. Let me see. Document data. This is this document status option, and if we scroll on down.
Right, I think it's right there. It was right next to you. Yeah.
Pre-flight, yeah. So again, you could set that in the overall filter guy or in the user filter. If I just wanted to restrict people, I would stick it in there.
Oh.
Boy, I was just gonna. Oh, this is what I was gonna say. And again, this is just. I think you've already got the idea that there are lots and lots of layers to this, and that's why I wanted to first just go through perhaps a useful order to put these in. But I think I have this built in here. Yeah, it might not be uncommon that maybe you're working on a file in here, and you say, all right, I've been looking at this in the Smart View, but I really need to see the full project. Maybe you need to see the flat plan or something like that. So one of these options that you can add into your actions is this thing here called Go To. If you select that, it'll jump you to the project where that file exists. So you're not cut off from anything you might want to do in the main project itself. You can still kind of hop back and forth between the two and do what you may consider to be normal things that have to take place within the project. But the vast majority of it you usually need to access in terms of markup and approval and rejection and all that stuff can all be done here. Like if I select those and hit the binoculars, right, I just get into the normal view mode for these things, and I can do everything I normally do on it. So for the most part, and this is one last thought that I'll throw out. Maybe this is, I'm not sure if this is true or false, but it's kind of the way I see it. I almost look at Smart Views as the inverse of user profiles. And the reason I say that is usually when you build a user profile, you start with kind of a full boat, right? All these different options. And you start whittling away and taking away the things you don't want people to do. So a user profile is often the whole enchilada whittled away. Whereas the Smart View, as you saw when we started this, I mean, if you start with a blank canvas, you got nothing. So what you're actually doing is kind of building from the ground up the interface for them and slowly giving them access to the actions and the filters and the different things you want them to be able to do. It's not a bad idea if you want to, crib from predefined Smart Views. For instance, on a lot of these, you'll see this one, DAM Advanced and DAM Lite on here that usually come with patch updates. You can always right-click on one of these things and dupe it. That way you don't have to worry about messing up the predefined one, and you can just make your own copy of that and then just start tearing it apart. Because especially one like this DAM Advanced and this DAM Lite, if you've ever looked through them, you'll see that the DALiM guys have put a boatload of stuff in here. And it's not the worst idea in the world to go through some of these and maybe delete one or two options, then look at it and see how it changes the Smart View and see how it changes the behavior. And use it as kind of a baseline Smart View to, I know this is a bad word, but to plagiarize from, because there's no good reason not to look at something that the manufacturer has built and get a notion of how they think it should work or of how they put these together when they want to play with a Smart View. I certainly don't think I've covered everything that and the reason I say that is what I mentioned earlier. If you look down the list of different things in here, there's a whole bunch of different options that you can add and build up. And just look at how many they put in this thing here. But
and those do change if you're building a project smart view versus a document workflows smart view as well.
yeah, I should have mentioned that. Everything I've done so far today has been a project smart view. But when you create one from scratch, it will give you that option of project or document. And yeah, if you do project, I think it whittles down your options over there quite a bit.
Mm.
All right, I think we should go to questions. Here's one right here. What does this one say? Do you see that question, Fred? I can't quite read it. Can I get a copy of DAM Advanced and DAM Lite? Yes, we can get those out. And that seems to have been something that's been a bit hit or miss, because I know there was a patch build that came out from DALiM. I think it was near the end of last year or something like that.
Yeah, I want to say they built it into one of the actual full installers, and it's not added just patches, because it does seem like it showed up on some people's systems and not on others.
What you can do sometimes, if it doesn't exist under the customization, you can take a quick peek under data import, and it might be sitting in here. If there's a DALiM software option in there, it might be in there. If it's not, just let us know. Yeah, and we can get these things to you.
Okay. Another question, kind of paraphrasing this, I guess. You know, currently everyone knows pretty much that you can use, or you have to use, a smart view when you're defining a file system on ES. Can you change that smart view per subfolders in the file system?
In ES4, I don't believe that you can.
I think you can now. If you go under the administrative area, and if you go to IO, no, sorry, go to production parameters, sorry.
Oh.
If you go there, you can see the different things under a file system. So each of those folders under his file system pull down is a specific file system he's viewing. If you click on that and you spin it down, you see the subfolders. You're seeing exactly what that file system is seeing on the server. You can click on any of those folders, and you can actually change the settings there for it. So you could have a folder maybe for images that uses that DAM Advanced, and maybe another one for videos that uses a completely different smart view that doesn't have maybe ratings and stuff like that, since it's just video files. Hopefully that answers that question.
You set me up, Fred. I was sure it was only ES5. All right.
Now they're adding that. They've actually been adding these to it. I've been going that through one of our customers. You can actually even set different template properties on these. So you could have a folder on the file system, a subfolder on the file system that actually uses a completely different workflow, document workflow, or approval steps, or whatever you want it to be, because it can use a different template from all your templates. So you can really customize how they're going. I'm actually using this for the customer I'm currently setting up right now.
Excellent.
Another question, well, there's two questions that have been asked by somebody that kind of go in hand with each other and are what you're talking about, Mike, they're ES5 things. That basically, whether we can use, one is whether we can use a smart view on a subfolder of a project. So having like an images folder, subfolder of a project, and then using a smart view of that instead of the default view. In 4.5, I don't think you can do that yet. That is something that's supposed to be coming in ES5, which should be beta around the Worldwide Technology Meeting in December. The other question that's similar to it is whether we could apply our own smart view to the search area. But there's always been a lot of requests on changing how the search area looks. Again, that's supposed to be, if I'm not mistaken, an ES5 function. Currently, you're kind of stuck with this view that exists today. And I think that's all the questions we got. So I'm going to take control back from you, Mike, just for a quick second. And just to mention, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Again, we'll be having another webinar in September. I believe Alex Roglo, our new employee, is going to be doing that one for us. And we're going to cover some of the imposition and sectioning settings that are in ES now, and kind of show how to use form workflows, section workflows, do impositions, and that kind of stuff in ES4.5. So if you're ever interested in what events we have going on or when our webinar is going to be, go to the events page on blanchsystems.com, and we should be listed in the calendar there. We also send out our invites as soon as we come up with our topics. And again, I mention this every time, but if you have a topic you'd like to see covered, please go ahead and send it to text@blanchsys.com. We'll be happy to take a look at it, and if we find it something that a lot of people would be interested in, we'll go ahead and add it to our topics in the future. So hopefully everybody has a great day today, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.